Montana Territory, 1878. The last letter from the matchmaker had been brutally clear. No further inquiries for Miss Adelaide Clarke. Will return passage funds minus commission. Adelaide folded the crisp paper and tucked it into her journal, where 6 other rejection notices kept it company. The stagecoach lurched over another rut, sending her bonnet askew. She straightened it with trembling fingers, trying to ignore the sympathetic glances from the other passengers. At 22, Adelaide had exhausted her options in Boston. When consumption claimed her parents, leaving nothing but debts, she'd sold their modest possessions and purchased passage west as a mail-order bride. 7 potential husbands had viewed her daguerreotype and correspondence, and 7 men had declined. 2 plain, 2 educated, 2 outspoken. The reasons varied, but the result remained the same. Now she was headed to Last Chance, a remote mining settlement in Montana Territory, where the matchmaker's cousin ran a boarding house that needed help. Not a wife, not even a proper lady's companion. Just another desperate woman doing menial work on the frontier. The frontier is for the unwanted, she whispered to herself, a mantra that had become her shield. It's where we disappear. The mountain pass narrowed, and Adelaide caught her breath at the beauty of the pine-covered slopes. She'd imagined the West as barren and ugly, like her prospects, but these mountains held a majesty that made her heart ache. For one foolish moment, she imagined building a life here, not as someone's rejected bride, but as herself. The thought vanished as quickly as it had come. Women didn't survive alone in such places, not without protection. The coach rolled into Last Chance just as afternoon shadows lengthened across the single dusty street. A collection of rough-hewn buildings clung to the mountainside, dominated by a sawmill and several saloons. Men outnumbered women 20-1, judging by the figures moving about. Adelaide's stomach tightened. She'd become a curiosity here, but never a bride. Miss Clarke, a thin woman in a practical gray dress, approached as Adelaide descended from the coach on wobbly legs. I'm Mrs. Finch. Welcome to the Pinewood boarding house. The boarding house proved cleaner than expected, but just as cheerless. Adelaide's attic room had a small window overlooking the mountains, its only redeeming feature. By sunset, she'd learned her duties: cooking, cleaning, laundry, and occasionally serving meals to the miners who took their supper at the boarding house. Most girls find husbands within a month, Mrs. Finch said, not unkindly. Though I suppose your situation is unusual. Adelaide forced a smile. I've made my peace with spinsterhood, Mrs. Finch. But that night, alone in her narrow bed, Adelaide allowed herself one final cry. Not for the men who had rejected her, but for the dream of belonging somewhere. To someone. Tomorrow, she would begin her new life as the mail-order bride no one wanted. Logan Grayson had spent 6 years carving a homestead from the wilderness, and now at 26, he finally had something to show for it. 200 acres of prime timber and pasture, a solid cabin built with his own hands, 40 head of cattle, and a reputation for fair dealing. What he didn't have was a wife, though not for lack of opportunity. 3 eligible women had come to Last Chance in the past year, and each had made their interest known. A mountain man needs mountain folk, he told his mare as they descended into town for supplies. Someone who understands that silence isn't emptiness. The horse snorted, unimpressed with his philosophy. Logan's twin brother had married in a fever at 19, bringing his bride to their shared homestead. 2 bitter winters later, she'd fled back east, taking Logan's brother and leaving Logan with nothing but bitter words about savages living like bears. He'd built his life back up, board by board, but the lesson had scarred deeper than the axe wound on his forearm. A man needed a woman who could weather the seasons of mountain life, not just its summer beauty. If I ever marry, he'd told his neighbor last spring, it'll be to someone who can give me sons to inherit what I'm building. Strong sons who love this land. But secretly, in the deepest hours of night when the coyotes howled and the cabin creaked with mountain winds, Logan admitted the truth. He wanted more than sons. He wanted to matter to someone. To have a woman look at him and see beyond the calloused hands and sun-weathered face to the man beneath. Someone to break the isolation that settled heavier than winter snow. He tied his horse outside Johnson's general store, nodding to the usual Saturday crowd. Something was different today. Conversations hushed as he entered, followed by knowing glances. Heard about the new girl at Finch's? Bob Johnson asked, weighing out coffee beans. Another mail-order bride? Logan gathered his supplies methodically. Salt, ammunition, a new shirt for Sundays. This one's different. Came all the way from Boston, but nobody wanted her. 7 rejections, Finch says. Johnson leaned closer. Pretty enough, they say, but odd. Reads books. Speaks her mind. Logan frowned. Cruel to gossip about a stranger's misfortune. Misfortune, hell? Woman like that's got no business out here. Johnson wrapped the coffee. Finnegan's already making bets on how long before she ends up working at the Ruby Palace. The saloon's upstairs girls were a fact of frontier life, but something in Logan's chest tightened at the callousness. He paid for his supplies in silence, letting the conversation flow around him. It wasn't until he reached the dry goods section that he saw her, a slender woman in a faded blue dress, auburn hair escaping its pins as she stretched to reach bolts of fabric. She wasn't beautiful in the conventional sense, but something about the determined set of her jaw caught his attention. "Allow me," he said, easily reaching the bolt she struggled for. She turned, startled, and Logan found himself looking into the clearest green eyes he'd ever seen. Not the pale green of new aspen leaves, but deeper, like the alpine lakes hidden in high mountain valleys. "Thank you," she said, her Eastern accent crisp but pleasant. "They stock everything important on the highest shelves, it seems." Important to whom is the question. He found himself smiling. "I'm Logan Grayson. Adelaide Clarke." She measured the fabric efficiently. "Recently of Boston, now employed at Mrs. Finch's boarding house. Welcome to Last Chance, Miss Clarke." She looked up sharply, as if expecting mockery, but his expression must have reassured her. "Thank you, Mr. Grayson. Though I suspect my welcome has been rather thoroughly discussed already." She nodded toward Johnson and the others, who quickly pretended not to be watching. "Small towns have long memories and little entertainment," Logan said. "They'll find something new to discuss soon enough." Adelaide's smile didn't reach her eyes. "My situation is rather unique, I'm told." 7 rejections makes for quite the conversation piece. Her matter-of-fact acknowledgement of what others whispered behind her back struck Logan as remarkably brave. Before he could respond, Mrs. Finch appeared, disapproval evident in her pinched expression. "Adelaide, we need these supplies back immediately. The miners will be expecting supper at 6 sharp." She nodded curtly to Logan. "Mr. Grayson." As Adelaide gathered her purchases, she glanced back once. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Mr. Grayson." Logan tipped his hat, watching as she followed Mrs. Finch into the street. Something about her lingered, not her appearance, though pleasant enough, but the quiet dignity with which she carried her rejection. He recognized the loneliness in her eyes because he'd seen it in his own reflection often enough. All the way back to his homestead, Logan found himself thinking about Adelaide Clarke and her 7 rejections. What kind of men would pass judgment on a woman they'd never met? And what kind of strength did it take to journey west anyway, knowing you weren't wanted? By October, Adelaide had settled into a routine at the boarding house. She rose before dawn to prepare breakfast, spent mornings cleaning and afternoons cooking, and collapsed into bed each night too exhausted to dwell on her circumstances. Mrs. Finch proved fair if not warm, and the miners treated her with gruff courtesy, though their eyes sometimes followed her with uncomfortable speculation. She'd seen Logan Grayson twice more, once at church, where he'd tipped his hat from across the small chapel, and once at the general store, where they'd exchanged brief pleasantries. Something about his steady gaze made her feel both seen and unsettled. Unlike most men in Last Chance, he looked her in the eyes when speaking, not at the floor or at her figure. Adelaide was hanging laundry when Mrs. Finch approached, her expression unusually animated. "Mr. Grayson is here to see you." "In the parlor." "Mr. Grayson?" Adelaide's hands stilled on the wet sheet. "Are you certain he's asking for me?" "He specifically requested Miss Adelaide Clarke." Mrs. Finch lowered her voice. "He's a good man, Adelaide. Owns one of the finest homesteads in the territory. Never comes to town without business." Heart racing inexplicably, Adelaide removed her apron and smoothed her hair. Logan Grayson stood as she entered the parlor, hat in hands. He'd clearly made an effort with his appearance. Clean shirt, hair neatly combed, boots polished. The formality of it made her nervous. "Miss Clarke," he said, his voice deeper than she remembered. "I hope I'm not interrupting your work." "Not at all, Mr. Grayson. How may I help you?" He gestured to the chair across from him, and they sat in awkward silence for a moment. Adelaide noticed his hands, strong, capable hands, calloused from work but clean, with neatly trimmed nails. Not the hands of a man who'd come on a whim. "I'll be direct, Miss Clarke. I've been thinking about your situation, and I have a proposition." He met her eyes steadily. "I need a wife. My homestead is prospering, but a man alone can only accomplish so much. I need a partner, someone to help build something lasting." Adelaide's breath caught. Not another rejection, but this? "Mr. Grayson, we've spoken perhaps 20 words to each other. I know your character by your actions. You've faced adversity with dignity. You work hard without complaint." He leaned forward slightly. "I'm not offering romance from penny novels, Miss Clarke. I'm offering a partnership, a home of your own, and if God wills it, children, sons to inherit what we build." There it was, the reason any man would want a wife in this wilderness. Sons, heirs. Adelaide had always imagined marriage as something more, even in her most practical moments. Her parents, for all their struggles, had loved each other deeply. "You've been very honest, Mr. Grayson. Allow me the same courtesy." She folded her hands to stop their trembling. "I came west believing marriage was my only option for survival. 7 rejections later, I've learned I can survive on my own. I won't exchange one form of dependence for another, even one as respectably offered as yours." His expression remained steady, but something flickered in his eyes. "You misunderstand, Miss Clarke. I'm not offering charity or seeking a servant. I'm proposing a true partnership." "Based on what, Mr. Grayson? What do you know of me beyond my failures?" "I know enough." He stood, towering in the small parlor. "I know you deserve better than what last chance whispers about you. Consider my offer. I'll return in 1 week for your answer." After he left, Adelaide pressed her hands to her burning cheeks. A proposal, not from love or even acquaintance, but from assessment, like examining livestock for purchase. The practical part of her recognized the opportunity. Logan Grayson was respected, established, and by last-chance standards, quite handsome. His homestead would be a vast improvement over her attic room. But something in her rebelled. The same something that had probably shown in her letters and frightened away those 7 men. Adelaide Clarke wanted to be chosen, not settled for. The autumn storm descended without warning, transforming October's sunshine into howling winds and slashing rain. Adelaide struggled back from the general store, her purchases clutched to her chest, skirts soaked to the knees. The deluge had emptied Last Chance's streets, everyone seeking shelter from the violent weather. She was halfway to the boarding house when the wagon appeared, moving fast through the downpour. Logan Grayson pulled his team to a halt beside her, water streaming from his oilskin coat. "Miss Clarke, get in immediately," he shouted over the wind. "I'm nearly there," she called back, gesturing toward the boarding house just visible through the rain. "This isn't rain, it's a mountain tempest. The creek's already flooding." He reached down a hand. "Please." Something in his voice, not commanding but genuinely concerned, made her decision. Adelaide grasped his hand, surprised by the gentle strength with which he pulled her onto the wagon seat. His coat was around her shoulders before she could protest, warm from his body and smelling of pine. "I need to get back to my homestead before the creek rises further," he explained, urging the horses forward. "I can't take you to the boarding house. The bridge will be underwater soon." Adelaide clutched the wagon seat as they lurched forward. "You're taking me to your home?" Alarm battled with the practical understanding that she had little choice. "Just until the storm passes." His profile was grim as he navigated the increasingly treacherous road. "I give you my word as a gentleman. Your reputation will remain intact." The journey took twice as long as normal, the wagon wheels slipping in mud and the creek, as Logan predicted, spilling over its banks. By the time they reached his homestead, Adelaide was chilled to the bone despite his coat. The cabin that emerged from the rainy twilight surprised her, larger than expected, with a covered porch and glass windows. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, suggesting someone waited inside. "My neighbor's wife looks after things when I'm in town," Logan explained, helping her down. "She'll have kept the fire going." The cabin's interior was simply but comfortably furnished, dominated by a large stone fireplace, where flames crackled welcomingly. A quilt-covered bed stood in one corner, a kitchen area in another. Everything spoke of careful craftsmanship. The smooth plank floors, the solid table and chairs, the bookshelves filled with volumes that immediately caught Adelaide's attention. "You have books," she said, unable to hide her surprise. "A man's mind needs feeding as much as his body." Logan took her sodden packages. "Mrs. Turner has left soup warming. You should get out of those wet clothes." At her alarmed expression, he added quickly, "I have a screen for privacy and spare clothes that might serve. I'll tend the horses while you change." Left alone, Adelaide battled her ingrained sense of propriety against practical necessity. Her dress clung to her like a second skin, and her teeth chattered uncontrollably. Behind the privacy screen, she found women's clothing laid out, simple but clean garments that must belong to Mrs. Turner. By the time Logan returned, she had changed into a warm flannel dress and hung her wet clothes near the fire. They shared a silent meal of hearty venison soup and fresh bread, the storm raging outside, making conversation difficult. Adelaide found herself studying her host covertly. In the firelight, his features seemed softer, the usual reserve replaced by simple concentration on the tasks at hand. He moved with the quiet efficiency of a man accustomed to caring for himself. "Will Mrs. Turner return?" she finally asked. Logan shook his head. "She and her husband live 2 miles east. She only comes on days I go to town." He hesitated. "I know this situation is compromising, Miss Clarke. I'll sleep in the barn." "That's absurd in this weather," Adelaide said before she could stop herself. "I trust your word as a gentleman, Mr. Grayson. The floor by the fire will be perfectly adequate for you." His smile transformed his face, revealing a dimple in his right cheek. "You're practical as well as brave, Miss Clarke. Necessity teaches practicality." She gestured to the books. "May I? Please." She selected a volume of Thoreau's Walden, settling into the rocking chair while Logan cleared their meal. The domestic scene struck her with unexpected force. The warm cabin, the rain beating against the windows, a man and woman sharing simple tasks and quietude. It felt dangerously close to something she'd stopped allowing herself to imagine. "Why did you ask me to marry you, Mr. Grayson?" The question escaped before she could reconsider. Logan paused in his work, regarding her thoughtfully. "Honesty. Always. I've been alone too long." He sat across from her, firelight playing across his features. "I've built something good here, but there's no joy in achievement without someone to share it. When I saw you in town, standing tall despite what they whispered," he looked away. "I recognized something in you, a strength that matches the mountains." "You don't know me," Adelaide said softly. "I know enough to want to learn more." His gaze returned to hers. "7 men were fools, Miss Clarke." The simple statement, delivered without flattery or expectation, touched something deep inside her. For the first time since leaving Boston, Adelaide felt tears threaten, not from sadness, but from the unexpected balm of being seen, valued. "Tell me about your homestead," she said, changing the subject before emotion could overwhelm her. Logan described his land with the tender pride of a man deeply connected to place. The south pasture where wildflowers grew thick in spring. The stand of pine he'd preserved for its beauty rather than lumber value. The creek that never ran dry, even in drought years. As he spoke, Adelaide could see it through his eyes, not a harsh wilderness to be conquered, but a living partnership between man and nature. "And you want sons to inherit all this," she said when he finished. A shadow crossed his face. "Family should continue beyond one lifetime." He hesitated. "My brother's wife," she called this place godforsaken, said no child should be raised so far from civilization. Perhaps she was right. Or perhaps she simply wasn't made for this life, Adelaide said carefully. "Some women flourish where others wither. It doesn't make the place wrong, just wrong for them." Their conversation continued as the storm raged, moving from books to childhood memories to careful discussions of what each valued. Adelaide found herself sharing things she'd told no one. Her father's death from consumption, her mother fading from grief, the desperate choice to come west when the creditors circled. Logan spoke of his own losses, parents taken by fever when he was 16, the bitter separation from his twin brother, the isolation of his early years on the homestead. "I'm not good with words," he admitted as midnight approached. "Not like you. But I've listened to what you haven't said, Adelaide Clarke." "And what's that?" "That you're afraid of disappearing." His voice was gentle. "Of becoming invisible. Those 7 men, they never saw you." "Not really." The insight struck with the force of revelation. She'd thought her fear was of dependence, of exchanging one form of servitude for another. But Logan had named the deeper terror, that she would live and die without ever being truly known. Sleep came fitfully for Adelaide, curled in Logan's bed while he kept his word and slept by the fire. The storm continued through the night, but another tempest raged within her. Logan Grayson was still largely a stranger, yet in one evening, he'd seen deeper into her heart than anyone since her parents died. Was that enough basis for the most important decision of her life? By morning, the rain had stopped, though the creek remained dangerously high. Logan prepared breakfast, fresh eggs and bacon, moving around his cabin with the ease of long habit. "I can take you back to town when the water recedes," he said, pouring coffee. "Probably by afternoon." Adelaide nodded, acutely aware of how domestic the scene felt. "How right? Your proposal, does it still stand?" His movement stilled. "It does. I need more time, Mr. Grayson." "Logan," he corrected gently. "If you're considering becoming my wife, you should use my name." "Logan." She tested it, finding she liked the sound. "I'm not saying yes, but I'm not saying no either." His smile returned, warming his eyes. "That's more than I had yesterday, Adelaide." The gossip began before Adelaide even reached the boarding house. Mrs. Finch met her at the door, face pinched with disapproval and concern. "You spent the night at Logan Grayson's cabin?" "Unchaperoned." Her whisper carried the weight of scandal. "The storm made return impossible," Adelaide explained, keeping her voice steady. "Mr. Grayson behaved as a perfect gentleman. He slept by the fire while I took his bed. It doesn't matter what happened, child. It matters what people believe happened." Mrs. Finch ushered her inside, away from curious eyes. "Your reputation was already in tatters, according to Last Chance," Adelaide said with more bitterness than intended. The mail-order bride no one wanted, now compromised by circumstance. What more can they say? Plenty, as it turned out. By evening, versions of Adelaide's overnight stay had circulated through town, each more scandalous than the last. The miners at supper avoided her eyes, their manner shifting from gruff courtesy to something uglier. One made a crude suggestion about sampling the merchandise that brought hot color to her cheeks. Mrs. Finch pulled her aside after the men left. "I'm sorry, Adelaide, but you can't stay here. The boarding house has a reputation to maintain." "You're dismissing me? Because of a storm?" Disbelief warred with a horrible sense of inevitability. This, too, was the frontier, unforgiving of women who stepped outside rigid boundaries, even involuntarily. "Because of choices," Mrs. Finch corrected, though not unkindly. "You have until tomorrow to make arrangements." Arrangements? The word hung in the air, its meaning clear. Without the boarding house position, Adelaide had few options. The Ruby Palace would hire her, certainly, not for housekeeping. Or she could throw herself on Logan's mercy and accept his proposal. Neither felt like a choice freely made. She was still awake at midnight when the pebble struck her window. Looking down, she saw Logan standing in the street below, his expression grim in the moonlight. Adelaide slipped downstairs and opened the back door. "You've heard," she said without preamble. "Last Chance has a vicious tongue." His hands clenched at his sides. "This is my fault. I should have found another solution yesterday. We both know the creek was impassable." Adelaide wrapped her shawl tighter against the night chill. "Mrs. Finch has given me until tomorrow." Logan stepped closer, his face shadowed. "Marry me, Adelaide. Not because you have no choice, but because we suit each other. You know it as well as I do." "Do I?" She fought the trembling in her voice. "Or am I simply desperate again? Look at me." His voice was low, intense. "Am I desperate? I have a good life, a prosperous homestead. I could have proposed to any of 3 willing women in town. I chose you. I'm choosing you now, not out of duty but desire." The word hung between them, charged with meaning beyond the practical partnership he'd first proposed. "I won't be pitted," Adelaide whispered. "Pity? Is that what you think this is?" In one swift movement, Logan closed the distance between them, his hands gently framing her face. "I admire you, Adelaide Clarke. Your courage, your mind, your heart. I want you as my wife because I believe we could build something remarkable together." His eyes, dark and earnest in the moonlight, held no deceit. Adelaide felt the last of her resistance crumbling, not from desperation or lack of options, but from recognition. This man, this relative stranger who somehow wasn't strange at all, Saw her. Truly saw her. Yes, she said simply. His smile broke like sunrise. Yes. I'll marry you, Logan Grayson. But not because last chance has forced my hand. Because I choose to. His kiss was gentle, almost reverent, and over far too quickly. We'll be married tomorrow. I've already spoken to Reverend Miller. Adelaide laughed despite herself. Rather presumptuous, Mr. Grayson. Hopeful, he corrected, the dimple appearing in his cheek. Get what rest you can. I'll come for you at dawn. They were married in the small church at first light, before most of last chance was stirring. Reverend Miller performed the ceremony with solemn dignity, making no reference to the circumstances that had hastened the union. Mrs. Turner served as witness, her kind face beaming approval. Adelaide wore her best dress, a deep green that matched her eyes, with wildflowers Logan had gathered at dawn. No family stood beside her, no friends wished her well, but as she spoke her vows, she felt a curious sense of rightness. This wasn't the marriage she'd imagined as a girl, but it was honest, founded on mutual respect and clear-eyed understanding. Logan's hand was steady as he slipped the ring on her finger, his mother's, he'd explained, preserved for this moment. His voice never wavered as he promised to cherish and protect, to honor and respect. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss Logan gave her was different from the previous night, still gentle, but with an undercurrent of promise that sent heat rushing through her. Mrs. Grayson, he murmured against her lips. Adelaide Clarke Grayson, a new name for a new life. The thought terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. They left town immediately, Logan's wagon loaded with Adelaide's few possessions and supplies for the winter ahead. She felt the stares of last-chance residents as they departed, some curious, others disapproving, a few openly hostile. None of it touched her as deeply as it might have yesterday. She was no longer the unwanted mail-order bride, but a wife returning to her home. Home. The word echoed in her mind as the town disappeared behind them and the mountain landscape opened before them. Logan pointed out landmarks as they traveled, the ridge where elk gathered in winter, the valley where he'd built a lined shack for summer grazing, the distant peaks that marked the border of their territory. Their territory. Already, she was thinking in terms of shared ownership, shared future. Are you afraid? Logan asked suddenly, his eyes on the road ahead. Yes, Adelaide answered honestly. But not of you. Of failing at this. Of disappointing you when winter comes and you realize I'm not the frontier wife you need. Winter reveals truth, Logan agreed, surprising her. But I've survived 6 of them alone. Together, we'll do more than survive, Adelaide. We'll thrive. The homestead looked different in daylight, the careful craftsmanship more evident, the surrounding beauty more striking. Logan helped her down from the wagon with the same gentle strength he'd shown that first rainy day, but now his touch lingered. Belonged. Welcome home, Mrs. Grayson, he said, and the simple words filled something empty inside her. November brought the first heavy snow, transforming the homestead into a winter wonderland that took Adelaide's breath away. Each morning she woke to find new beauty outside their windows, frost patterns like delicate lace, snow drifts sculpted by wind, sunlight turning everyday scenes into brilliance. The isolation that had frightened her in theory proved different in practice. She and Logan were alone, yes, but never lonely. Their days fell into comfortable rhythm. Logan tended livestock and hunted while Adelaide managed the cabin, learning to bake in the cast-iron stove and preserve the last of the autumn harvest. Evenings were spent by the fire, reading aloud from his collection of books or simply talking. They discovered shared passions for literature and natural philosophy, debates that sometimes lasted until the fire burned low and the only sensible solution was to retire to bed. The physical aspect of their marriage had developed with the same careful respect that marked all of Logan's actions. On their wedding night, he'd been tender and patient, allowing Adelaide time to adjust to this most intimate aspect of partnership. As days passed, their passion deepened, uninhibited by the isolation that might have constrained them in town. Adelaide found herself falling in love with her husband, not the practical appreciation she'd started with, but something deeper and more complex. She saw beneath Logan's quiet exterior to the passionate, thoughtful man within. Watched how gently he handled newborn calves, how carefully he maintained every aspect of their homestead. Discovered his dry humor, so rarely displayed in public, and the depth of his knowledge about the natural world. Most importantly, she recognized how completely he accepted her, mind and spirit as well as body. December's first blizzard confined them to the cabin for 3 days. On the second evening, as wind howled outside and snow piled against the windows, Adelaide finished reading the final chapter of Walden. Logan sat beside her, whittling a small wooden horse. "I've been thinking," she said, closing the book, "about what you said when you proposed. About sons." His hands stilled on the carving. "Yes. You wanted someone to give you sons to inherit all this." She gestured to encompass their home, the land beyond. "I understand why, now that I've seen what you've built." "Adelaide," he began, but she continued. "I want that too. Children. A family. But not just sons, Logan." Her hand drifted to her stomach, still flat, but harboring a secret she'd been certain of for 2 weeks. "Daughters too. Girls who can learn to love this land as we do." Logan's expression shifted from confusion to dawning comprehension. "Are you saying?" "I'm with child." The words filled her with both terror and joy. "Our child." The carving and knife clattered to the floor as Logan moved to kneel before her, his hands gently covering hers. "When? June, I think. Summer's child." His eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I never dared hope so soon." His voice was rough with emotion. "Adelaide, He stopped, struggling for words. "What is it?" "I love you." The declaration burst from him, raw and honest. "I know our marriage began practically, but somewhere between that rainy day and now, I've fallen completely in love with you. Not just as the mother of my child, but as the woman you are." Adelaide's own tears spilled over. All the fears she'd carried, that she would never be truly wanted, truly chosen, dissolved in the face of his declaration. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think perhaps I began that night in the storm, when you saw what no one else had bothered to see." His kiss was tender, reverent with the knowledge of the new life they'd created. When he pulled back, his smile held all the warmth of their fire against the winter storm. "Boy or girl, this child will be loved," Logan promised. "And so will all who follow." "And their mother?" Adelaide teased, though her heart beat fast with vulnerability. "Their mother most of all." His hand cradled her cheek. "The mail-order bride no one wanted has become the wife I can't live without." Summer, 1879. Adelaide sat on the porch, her 5-day-old daughter nursing contentedly at her breast. The June sunshine bathed the homestead in golden light, wildflowers nodding in the gentle breeze. From the south pasture came the sound of Logan's voice, deep and sure as he directed the men helping with the summer branding. Their first year of marriage had brought changes neither could have predicted. The harsh winter that might have tested their bond had instead strengthened it. When February brought a week of temperatures so cold the mercury froze, they'd huddled together under quilts, reading Shakespeare by lamplight and making plans for spring. When March floods threatened the lower pasture, Adelaide had worked alongside Logan to move cattle to higher ground, earning his pride and deepening her own connection to the land. By April, when her pregnancy became impossible to hide, Logan had insisted they visit Last Chance. Head held high, Adelaide had walked the same street where gossips had once condemned her, now visibly carrying the next generation of Graysons. The town's reaction surprised her. Respectful nods from men who had once leered, cautious overtures of friendship from women who had whispered behind her back. "It's not you that's changed," Logan had explained on the journey home. "It's how they see you. You're established now. Respectable. Because of you," Adelaide had said. No, his certainty had been absolute. "Because you didn't break. They respect strength out here, even when they don't understand it." Now, as their daughter finished nursing, Adelaide adjusted her clothing and lifted the baby to her shoulder. Lily Grace Grayson, named for Logan's mother and Adelaide's, had her father's dimple and her mother's auburn hair. Perfect in every way, though not the son Logan had once spoken of wanting. "There's my girls." Logan's voice carried from the yard as he approached, hat in hand, face streaked with dust from the day's work. He climbed the porch steps and sat beside them, one arm circling Adelaide's shoulders, the other hand gently stroking Lily's downy head. "How's the branding going?" Adelaide asked, leaning into his embrace. "Finished for the day?" 40 new calves wearing the Grayson mark. His pride was evident. "Mitchell's staying for supper. Says he has news from town." Thomas Mitchell was their closest neighbor and friend, a gruff widower who had appointed himself Lily's honorary grandfather from the moment of her birth. Adelaide suspected his frequent visits had as much to do with her cooking as with his affection for the baby, but she welcomed his company nonetheless. "I'll set another place," she said, making to rise, but Logan's arm tightened around her. "Sit with me a moment longer." His voice held a note she recognized, the tone he used when something significant was on his mind. "I've been thinking about what you said last winter. About daughters loving this land too." Adelaide waited, sensing he needed to find his own words. "When I asked if you would give me sons," Logan continued, "I was thinking too narrowly. About bloodlines and inheritance." His finger traced Lily's perfect cheek. "But watching you these past months, how completely you've embraced this life, how fiercely you love our land, I realized something." "What's that?" "Legacy isn't just about sons. It's about passing on what matters." He met her eyes, his own shining with emotion. "You're teaching me that every day, Adelaide. That love transforms ownership into stewardship. That what we build together is greater than what either of us could build alone." Adelaide blinked back tears, overwhelmed by how completely her life had changed in less than a year. From unwanted bride to beloved wife. From rootless traveler to woman of substance. From alone to profoundly connected. "I'm glad you asked that question," she said softly. "About giving you sons. If you hadn't, we might never have found our way here." "We would have," Logan said with quiet certainty. "Some things are meant to be, Adelaide Grayson. Some hearts are meant to find each other, no matter how unlikely the path." As the summer evenings settled around them, Adelaide looked out over the homestead that had become her heart's true home. The garden she'd planted flourished in neat rows. Smoke rose from the chimney of the cabin Logan had expanded to welcome their child. In the distance, cattle grazed peacefully on land that would someday belong to Lily and the brothers or sisters who might follow. 7 men had rejected her without knowing what they missed. But one man, her mountain man, had seen beyond appearances to the woman beneath, had offered partnership instead of ownership, had given her not just his name, but his heart. And in return, Adelaide had given him more than sons. She had given him a family, a legacy built on love as enduring as the mountains that cradled their home.